We've seen a handful of outsiders seeking to challenge President Biden and former President Donald Trump as third-party or independent candidates. One is Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Robert Kennedy Jr.
Oh, Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Robert F. Kennedy.
Robert F.
Robert F.
Robert F.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
A Libertarian candidate, Javier Milei, has become the new president of Argentina.
The chainsaw plan of Javier Milei's libertarian government is underway. No gradualism or waiting periods. The changes are already underway.
They say that they like free markets, but they despise free markets. There is no stronger advocate for free market capitalism than myself.
For 30 years, I said the same thing, is the best thing that we could do is have true free market capitalism.
Look at my speeches from 40 years ago, and you see people asking me what's the most important thing we can do for the environment. I've said consistently for all this time, free market capitalism. Because we don't have that in our country. We have corporate crony capitalism. We have this system of cushy, lavish socialism for the rich and a merciless, barbaric capitalism for the poor. There's all different brands of libertarianism. The one thing they all have in common is that they hate authority. And I love dealing with libertarians.
Having Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as our candidate would absolutely seal ballot access for us.
Let's go take back our country.
RFK Jr. hates the naive warmongering neocons. I'd love to see him represent the Libertarian Party I helped build.
I think Robert Kennedy Jr. would make a great Libertarian Party presidential candidate.
I too think Robert Kennedy Jr. would make a great Libertarian Party presidential candidate.
Hello, I am Theodor Herzl, the founder of Political Zionism. I fully endorse Robert Kennedy Jr. as the Libertarian Party's presidential nominee. His genuine concern for the Jewish people and numerous Jewish friends make him an ideal candidate to help bring peace to the region. I am deeply sorry about the neocons.
The case for an RFK Jr. 2024 Libertarian Party presidential nomination. Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s interest in running for president as the Libertarian Party's 2024 candidate is a great opportunity to help educate the public about everything that is desperately needed to save not just the US, but perhaps all of civilization if the naive neocons are not stopped in time to prevent what will surely be the final world war. Let me describe the countless benefits of an RFK Jr. LP run. 1. There is the man himself. From every indication that I have, RFK Jr. is a truly courageous man willing to make the ultimate sacrifices to help save America. He seems like the person who, although in an obviously high position of power and prestige, is extremely humble and willing to take advice from, and praise and value, everyone. This podcast episode with fellow Austro-libertarian Jeremy Hammond, who like the great Murray Rothbard, is a profound writer in economics, history and thus criticizing Zionist fallacies, and also vaccinations myths, is a great example of RFK Jr.'s humble and inquisitive demeanor. During the last year, in his podcast RFK Jr. has had leading freedom fighters like David Stockman, Matt Taibbi, Jeffrey Sachs, Scott Ritter, Colonel Douglas McGregor and countless others. 2. Hardly anyone of significant fame has fought the priesthood of scientism and the communism like RFK Jr. has. His best-selling book The Real Anthony Fauci has been akin to Martin Luther's 95 Theses regarding the devastating blow it has given the priesthood of scientism, just like Luther's writings did to the coercive monopoly power of the Catholic Church at the time. The Pope of Scientism, Anthony Fauci, and his chemical slaughter of millions via the pseudoscientific HIV/AIDS death dogma, and its repeat via the COVID mania, and disastrous COVID vaccines talismans, is being exposed for its true mythical nature. The longer this book continues to dominate, and thus outcompete the priesthood of scientism, the more the faithful masses wake up to the fact that they have been sacrificing virgins in vain, and even more importantly, Appreciate freedom in the scientific medical realm. 3. RFK Jr. knows what a calamity the so-called neocons have been. Below is a spectacular 1.5-minute video that summarizes how these simple-minded tribalistic ideologues have bankrupted America and destroyed millions of lives.
The driving force behind wars in this country have been a group of people called the neocons that are embedded in the State Department. They published their manifesto in the late 1990s. It was called the Project for a New American Century, and this outlined their plans for the world. And what they said is that America had won the Cold War, and as the victor, it was our privilege to run the world for at least a century. It would be the Project for a New American Century, and that we should accomplish this feat through the use of our superior military power and through violence. And it outlined 8 countries that needed to be overthrown, including Iraq. And then shortly after publication of that, the neocons in the White House who surrounded President George W. Bush defrauded us into the Iraq War by saying there were weapons of mass destruction and suggesting, falsely that Saddam had something to do with the 9/11 attack. Now, that war cost us in the end about $8 trillion. We left Iraq worse than we found it. We killed more Iraqis than Saddam Hussein. The country is now an incoherent battle between Shia and Sunni death squads. We created ISIS. We drove 2 million refugees into Europe, which destabilized all the nations in Europe for, the next probably century. And all of those neocons were driven out of office, and we thought they were gone forever. But they reappeared first in the Obama administration. Now they run the Biden administration.
4. RFK Jr., although no seasoned Austrian economist like Dr. Ron Paul, is 100% for real capitalism, and understands the vital role of competition in the private sector. Here is a brief but excellent 1-minute video of RFK Jr. properly defending capitalism and free markets.
Analyze our marketplace so that a market does what it's supposed to do, which is to reward good behavior and punish bad behavior. I believe in free market capitalism because I believe that the marketplace promotes efficiency. Efficiency means the elimination of waste. Pollution is waste. A free market would urge us to properly value our natural resources, and it's the undervaluation of those resources that causes us to use them wastefully. In a true free market, you can't make yourself rich without making your neighbors rich and without enriching your community. What polluters do is they make themselves rich by making everybody else poor. They raise standards of living for themselves by lowering quality of life for everybody else, and they do that by escaping the discipline of the free market and forcing the public to pay their production costs. You show me a polluter, I'll show you a fat cat using political clout to escape the discipline of the free market and force the public to pay his costs.
Thank you. Let's move on to another.
Here Kennedy properly identifies central banking and the Federal Reserve as the enabler of all the tribalistic warmongering transfers of wealth from the poor and middle class to the mega rich.
The Fed is also, it's what funds the war machine. Fiat currency was invented to fund wars, and a war machine would stop overnight if the Fed wasn't there to fund it. The Fed also, policies are designed to move wealth upward, increase these giant disparities of wealth that completely destabilize our democracy, and to do a lot of everything that comes out of the Fed is pretty bad. All of the ultimate impacts of it. And we have to figure out how to restore sovereignty over the Fed to the public and how to ensure transparency. There's no transparency, and to end the kind of voodoo that these Merlins on Wall Street cook up and pretend that it's actual, economic science, but other than just, a formula for shifting wealth upward. But
RFK Jr. greatly respects Ron Paul, and the feeling is mutual.
He's special to us because he's a friend, and he doesn't call himself a libertarian, but he doesn't know it. He's leaning strongly toward libertarianism and away from the two parties, and that happens to be somebody that questions the lockdowns and the pharmaceuticals and interventionist foreign policy. So he's very much on our side on many issues. That's RFK, Robert Kennedy.
Yeah.
And he's somebody that we visited with. He's been on this program, and he's been to our seminars. So.
Next, I would like to address some potential objections. 1. There are many libertarians, myself included, who feel like Zionism and the resulting Israeli state have been a massive error, and the sort of ideological swimmer's kick that is responsible for most of the geopolitical chaos we see in the world today, especially in the Middle East, given the constant warmongering that arises from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Intellectual leaders associated with the Mises caucus like Scott Horton and Dave Smith have been disappointed, to say the least, regarding RFK Jr.'s seemingly strong support of the Israeli Zionist government and its handling of the Israeli-Hamas war. Zionism, as with socialism, is a complex ideological movement that misled many bright and well-intentioned people to disaster. The socialists were thoroughly convinced in the morality of punishing or preventing businessmen's alleged exploitation of labor by making a profit from hiring them, this morally justified in their minds making criminals out of businessmen, and killing them if necessary. The Zionists, for very, very understandable reasons like the centuries-long anti-Semitism, have likewise persuaded themselves that what they are doing is moral from their perspective. Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Castro, Maduro, etc. followed their Marxist intellectuals and were unfortunately adored by millions as they pushed their ideology, leaving immense suffering on its wake. Likewise, Zionist leaders, like all Israeli prime ministers, have their great Zionist ideologues like Theodor Herzl, are adored by millions of Zionized Jews and evangelical Christians and countless others, as they push their ideology, leading to immense suffering on its wake. As Hayek tells us, it is necessary to realize that the sources of many of the most harmful agents in this world are often not evil men but high-minded idealists, and that in particular the foundations of totalitarian barbarism have been laid by honorable and well-meaning scholars who never recognized the offspring they produced. Hayek again. Most people are still unwilling to face the most alarming lesson of modern history, that the greatest crimes of our time have been committed by governments that had the enthusiastic support of millions of people who were guided by moral impulses. It is simply not true that Hitler or Mussolini, Lenin or Stalin, appealed only to the worst instincts of their people, they also appealed to some of the feelings which also dominate contemporary democracies. Today the Zionists are as negligent of the suffering of Gazans as Lenin and his Bolsheviks were regarding the suffering of the kulaks and the millions of Catholics and religious people who stubbornly refused to go along with socialist ideology and morality. But this should not be seen as some naive moral failing on their part. This is all about the evolution of complex ideologies and fallacies. As Mises reminds us,
the problems involved are purely intellectual and must be dealt with as such. It is disastrous to shift them to the moral sphere and to dispose of supporters of opposite ideologies by calling them villains. It is vain to insist that what we are aiming at is good and what our adversaries want is bad. The question to be solved is precisely what is to be considered as good and what is bad. The rigid dogmatism peculiar to religious groups and to Marxism results only in irreconcilable conflict. It condemns beforehand all dissenters as evildoers, it calls into question their good faith, it asks them to surrender unconditionally. No social cooperation is possible where such an attitude prevails.
Mises' wisdom applies to Zionism as well. Thus, just like Mises Hayek Hazlitt provided, we need a careful understanding of the fallacies leading to the polarizations and wars, not naive moral pontification, because no social cooperation is possible where such an attitude prevails. Mises again.
Neither as judges allotting praise and blame nor as avengers seeking out the guilty should we face the past. We seek truth, not guilt, we want to know how things came about to understand them, not to issue condemnations.
RFK Jr.'s strong sympathies with Zionism and seemingly good relations with many prominent Zionist Jewish leaders like Rabbi Shmuley is actually a huge benefit for those of us who feel like Zionism was a mistake. If we are ever going to overcome Zionist fallacies, we must help Zionists realize they made a mistake, just like the great Austrian economists helped socialists overcome their fallacies. RFK Jr. could very well be, or help us foment, the necessary Zionist Gorbachevs needed to end the current brand of Zionism, just like happened with Soviet communism. In RFK Jr.'s discussion with Dave Smith, he did a great job of understanding and describing the Zionist view, and this is great. It took immense class and honest search for truth for RFK Jr. to do the podcast with Dave Smith, who rightly criticized him and sees things differently. More evidence of RFK Jr.'s greatness. And not only that, RFK Jr. in a very sincere and heartfelt manner even offered Dave to be his running mate, thus helping launch to immediate worldwide attention one of Zionism's and statism's best critics. What a golden opportunity. How much of a naive neoconish Zionist could RFK Jr. possibly be, if he actually had Dave Smith as running mate? Bottom line, RFK Jr. would be superb for the LP regarding helping fix all the Zionist-related chaos, especially if he has Dave Smith as running mate, which would greatly improve RFK Jr.'s free market views as well as those related to Zionism. Maybe Dave Smith will be the Jewish Gorbachev. Maybe Dave Smith is Kwisatz Haderach. 2. RFK Jr. is not a real libertarian. This is nonsense. Libertarian is a word whose meaning is very subjective. Some feel like libertarian must be the 100% totally privatized anarcho-capitalist view, some feel like it is consistent with various degrees of minarchism. Ultimately, the LP and the libertarianism it represents is shaped by the complex and subjective views of those who show up.